There are two powerful forces in our culture that are working against your church, having the good news impact that you long for. Do you know what they are? And is it possible that without realizing it, you're actually working with those forces and not against them? If that were true, it might explain why you can't seem to get any real, sustained, gospel driven momentum in your church. In this video, I'm going to walk you through what those two forces are and how your church can make the shift to working against those forces that want to hold you back and start seeing the kind of everyday impact that you're looking for. Let's dive in. So, what are the two forces working against your church, and how did I identify them? Great questions. First of all, I've been working in, with, and for the local church for over 25 years. I've held almost every church staff position you can have, except for senior pastor and women's ministry director. I've been a worship leader, executive pastor, youth pastor, family pastor, children's ministry director, and communications director. I'm still the communications director, actually, at 3 different churches right now. I've even been the church janitor. And not only that, but I've consulted with churches all over the country for the past about 18 years. And during that time, and especially in the last 5 to 10 years, those two powerful forces that are working against every local church, I think, have become stronger and more clear. And not only do most pastors and church leaders not know what these forces are, but without realizing it, many of us have embraced a model of church that works with those forces rather than against them. And that might explain why you can, or why a lot of churches can't seem to get any real sustained, disciple making, gospel driven, kingdom expanding momentum in your church. Here they are, these two powerful forces working against every local church in the United States are consumer culture and content culture. Now, the first one, consumer culture, that's not a surprise, right? We've complained as church leaders, we've complained for decades about people in our churches being consumers and how difficult it is for most people to break out of that consumer identity. And the second one, content culture, has really gained steam in the last 10 years. I mean, think about the changes we've seen in our culture in the last 5, 10, 20, 25 years. Content is now everywhere. It's in your pocket. You're watching it right now. Content drives so much of our culture and so much of how we all spend our time. And of course, those two forces go together. Consumer culture and content culture. They feed on each other and they feed each other. So when almost every message in our culture reinforces that there's something we can purchase to solve every problem we have, that's consumer culture, and there's something we can watch that will hold our attention. It'll entertain us or educate us or enrage us. We love to be enraged, don't we? That's content culture. When all of the messages in our culture fit at least into one of those buckets, if not both of them, that's who we become, consumers and consumers of content. That's how people in our culture are being discipled, right? You've heard that before, that our culture is discipling us. And it is into consumer culture and content culture. So the people in your church, of course, that's how they're going to approach that's how they approach everything in their life, probably subconsciously. Like, no one walks around going, I want nothing but things that I can purchase to take away all the problems in my life, or something I can watch to take my mind off of how crazy the world is, that's entertaining or educating, or something that I can focus my rage toward. People don't go around thinking that consciously, but that's what we do. So it's no wonder that when people come to your church, when they're in your church, when they come on Sunday morning, that they behave as consumers, as those passive receivers of the Sunday service. And it's no wonder that people in your church are there because they probably tried another church and that pastor down the road isn't as authentic as you are, or doesn't have the teaching that's as deep as yours, or that church's worship style isn't what they prefer. An encouraging, uplifting experience laced with Jesus language that's presented in a way that's engaging is exactly what someone discipled by consumer content culture is looking for in a church. And that's how I think we as the church in the United States, many of us are colluding with the same forces that are holding us back. And it's because of the model that we've embraced, or the model that we've inherited is exactly what someone discipled by consumer content culture is looking for. So, what's the solution? Should we intentionally make our services low quality, difficult to get through because the worship is so terrible, and intentionally preach boring messages that are filled with theological terminology that no one understands? Of course not. That's not what I'm saying. But if we want to help people move beyond that consumer content culture, we've got to take a step back and rethink our model, and rethink especially what Sunday looks like and what our model for a Sunday service is communicating. And then we're going to have to intentionally subvert the consumer content culture, because everything communicates something. Everything you do is communicating something. What you do, what you teach, what you celebrate, it's all communicating. And so if you want to move people out of that consumer content culture, you've got to change the way you communicate across the board. And it starts with what you communicate on Sunday. So getting people to move beyond Sunday and to move beyond that consumer content culture is not about better worship or better sermons or better announcements or better video testimonies or better social media strategies or better digital tools. It's not about any of those things. It's actually deeper than any of those things. That's why I developed the Church Communications Playbook, to help churches change the way they communicate. And the playbook is based on 5 things: a clear strategy that you communicate consistently in what you do, what you teach, and what you celebrate. When all of those 5 things are aligned and working together, then you'll see people begin to move out of that consumer content mindset and move into the life of God that saturates their entire lives, not just on Sunday, but every day. Look, one of the most important things that happens when you use the Church Communications Playbook is that you, as the pastor, you're no longer only a great preacher, you're also a great leader. Look, pastors are trained to preach. That's the majority of your training, when you think about it, is about how to preach, how to teach the Bible. And don't feel bad about that. It needs to be done well, it needs to be done right. But great preaching alone is not enough to consistently bring real and lasting change into people's everyday lives. If it were, you wouldn't have small groups, you wouldn't have support groups, you wouldn't have care ministries, you wouldn't have any of the other ministries that you have in your church, because all you would do is sit people down and have them listen to you preach a message once a week. So you know that great preaching alone isn't enough to bring the kind of change that people need to experience. What you teach and what you preach needs to be aligned with the practical steps you're asking people to take beyond Sunday, the practical steps you're asking people to move into deeper engagement in the life of your church. So when you move from being only a great preacher also into being a great leader, you move beyond just creating moments on Sunday and inviting people into a good news movement that's happening every day. It means you're going to have to rethink what you do, what you teach, and what you celebrate. But when you do that, this is what it can look like. Let me give you an example. You preach a 3-week series about how Jesus came as a servant. That was one of the ways he talked about himself. He said, I came to serve, to seek and to save, right? Those who are lost. It's one of the messages he gave to his disciples the night before he died. That's how important this identity of Jesus thinking of himself as a servant, that's how important it was. It was one of the very last things he communicated to his closest first disciples. He came to serve his Father's purpose, to be the living embodiment of God's message of love, compassion, grace, and forgiveness. So you preach a 3-week series about that. That this is one of the ways that we as a church engage with that life and live out that life of God, that life of Jesus. One of the ways that we follow Jesus is by being a servant through serving. And we've got plenty of places here at church where we need people to serve. So you tell them, you do a 3-week series. All through the series, you're saying, hey, on week 3, I'm going to be asking you to commit to where you will serve in the ministries of our church. Not just so our ministries can be great, although we want them to be great, but because this is what people who follow Jesus do. They serve. And so now you're preaching the series, and then you're telling people, I'm going to ask you to practice what I'm preaching, to sign up to serve. So you choose worship songs for those 3 weeks that reinforce these ideas of surrendering and serving and giving our lives to God as a sacrifice. You tell stories or show videos of people who are already serving and the impact that's having on them personally and for the people that they serve. And then, like I said, on that third Sunday, you invite people to a deeper experience of the life of God by signing up to serve. You've been telling them it's coming for weeks, so they're ready. Now, I work with a church with an average of just over 2,500 people on Sundays. I'm the director of communication with them. They already had hundreds of people serving. They used this strategy I just outlined. They aligned what they do, what they teach, what they celebrate. And guess what happened? Over the past year, they did 2 sermon series like this. They added 325 new volunteers between those 2 sermon series. That's 13% of their average attendance. They already had hundreds of people serving. 13% of their congregation moved from being a consumer to being a servant because they because they aligned what they did, what they taught, and what they celebrated. And then they said, "Join us." They invited people to step in. Now, let's ask a couple of questions. Do you think that that would have happened if the sermon series was about something completely different and they made announcements or sent emails or posted on social media saying, we could really use some more people to help in the kids department. This is your opportunity to make an impact on a child's life. They would not have had 325 people sign up because it's an announcement. What you are communicating on Sunday is that this is an option. It's a small piece. It's a tiny piece. It's not the thing. When you make it the thing, even for 2 or 3 weeks in a sermon series, people get the message. It cuts through that consumer content culture. People get it. They listen and they move. Everything communicates something. And by focusing those Sundays completely on serving the worship, the message, the stories they told, people understood this is important, not just because it was good content for them to consume. Of course, it was very well done. This church, like great worship. The pastor's a great preacher, but that's not why it was successful alone. It's because all of those things fit and work together as a package. It wasn't just an add-on announcement. It wasn't just something that was sent in an email or a text or posted on social media. By the way, don't ever post on social media and say you need people to help in your kids department. Think about that for a minute. Don't do it. So what did they see? They saw people move. They moved out of that consumer content mindset and they signed up to serve. Like I said, is the pastor of that church a great preacher? Absolutely. But by using this approach, he moved beyond being only a great preacher into being a great leader. The result was not people just saying, hey, that was a great message, Pastor, as they walked out. The result was they moved. They signed up. They practiced what he preached. And you know what? They've already got another sermon series on serving scheduled for next year. Because by then, there'll be more people. And guess what? They got 13%. There's more people who haven't gotten the message. So they're going to come back to it again. Because serving is a key part of what it looks like to be a follower of Jesus. And so are you going to be done preaching on that? They'll find another way to preach on it next year. That's the creativity, but they're still going to be preaching on serving. And that's the power of the communications playbook. It aligns what you do, what you teach, and what you celebrate. And as people move beyond Sunday, and as you, the pastor, move beyond being a great preacher and more into being a great leader, your church's impact moves beyond Sunday and into every day. And that's really what we all want. When the local church is at its best, it's not about a great service on Sunday. It's about seeing positive, gospel driven change in lives, relationships, families, and communities every day. That's the impact every pastor wants. And it only happens when you move people beyond Sunday. And in order to do that, you have to change the way you communicate. And that's what the Church Communications Playbook is designed to help you do. When you have a clear strategy, you communicate it consistently in what you do, what you teach, and what you celebrate. You move beyond these single serve Sunday experiences that just feed that consumer content culture, and you move into leading a good news movement that has powerful impact beyond Sunday and into the everyday lives of the individuals, families, and the community that you serve. That's what I want for you. And so I want to help your church and your church's impact to move beyond Sunday and into every day. There are two ways that you can get started doing that. That I put together. One is I've got a free toolkit that is the Essential Church Communications Toolkit. 5 tools. You only need 5, by the way. 5 communication tools, 5 channels that you need to implement in your church to be able to do this. You can get started right now. It's completely free. So go to sc3partners.com/toolkit, or you can get a customized church communications playbook specifically designed for your church at sc3partners.com/playbook. I'll meet with you twice, once for a 90-minute call, you and your team, ask you a lot of questions about your church and about your strategy and what you're inviting people to move into beyond Sunday. So I'll ask you questions for that 90 minutes. We'll go and we'll customize the Church Communications Playbook specifically for you, for your context, for the steps that you're inviting people to take. And then we'll have a second phone call, 90 minutes, where I'll present that playbook to you. We'll walk through it. I'll answer any questions that you have. You'll have a playbook that will completely change the way you communicate forever if you put it into practice, right? Look, these are two powerful forces: consumer culture, content culture. If you're not intentional and intentional about subverting that, you will, like most churches in the United States, unknowingly be colluding with the forces that are actually working against you, because you'll slide back into just, let's produce a great Sunday service, and the best we can hope for is that people will come back next week. That is a consumer content culture metric and a consumer content culture approach. You can do better. We can do better. I can help you to do better. So go check it out, sc3partners.com, and look forward to hearing from you.